Your failure makes me feel better, Scott. Just deal with it.
Well, I'm so excited. We're starting this pod with such honesty. This episode is starting with a lot of honesty, and that my failures make Lili feel better.
It's true.
Well, today we get to talk about how Lili's failures make me feel better.
Great.
Because we're talking about teenagers and being a single parent to teenagers. I don't have a teenager yet, but he's about to be a teenager. But Lili's got teens, and
Yes.
I get to learn from you your mistakes and your triumphs.
Okay. I feel like I'm not ready to call anything a triumph, but okay, I'll bite.
I'm Lili, single mom to teen twins.
Mother! I'm recording in here.
And I'm Scott, single dad to a preteen boy. Dad! It's under the sink!
We're two old friends trying to navigate single parenting.
And spending the whole time thinking, I hope I don't fuck this up.
First off, I do want to say for anyone watching this and not just listening to it, I am wearing sunglasses. The reason why I'm wearing sunglasses is not because I'm an asshole. That's me being an asshole has nothing to do with the sunglasses. Those are separate issues.
Unrelated.
I have a weird little eye infection thingy. It's not pink eye, but it's a weird little eye infection thingy. And I am incredibly vain, so I am wearing my sunglasses. But it does seem like it's the kind of thing you should be wearing if you're talking about teenagers, because let's look cool if we're going to talk about the coolest people on the planet.
I don't know that any teenager would call that cool.
What? What? You're telling me that a teenager wouldn't look at this cool ass dude and be like, that guy's going to buy me beer, man. That guy is
Lesson
cool.
number one about teenagers, they are going to humble you in ways that you did not know you could be humbled.
God, you're so paddle weary. You're just so like, oh man, you have no idea what awaits you on the other side. Sounds like we're about to go into a very personal, deep, dark place. Before we do that, before we rip open Lili's soul and then just cry at what we find, let's talk about our parenting fails of the week.
Yes. I mean, I feel like this fail was only an internal fail, maybe. My kid had a thing at his school after school, like it was 6:00 college workshop, come and learn how to do all the stuff. We're going to talk about financial aid. We're going to talk about Naviance and like all these things that in college, when we applied to them, I had no idea about because we didn't have them. We had a pen and we had a typewriter or a paper, and that was it. Like you wrote your essay, you applied, you sent them your money, you got rejected. And so I went, I was texting him, I was like, hey, are you coming to the thing? And he said, do I have to? And I thought I was doing a very good parenting thing by making it his choice and hoping that he would choose the right thing. And I said, it's your call. And he said, okay, then I won't. The college counselors will just tell me. And I did not say, this is them telling you, you're an idiot. And I said, okay, fair enough. And I wanted, so my intention was to let him live through the consequences of his actions and not know anything about college. But instead, what I did is I went by myself and I took copious notes, which are sitting here on my desk somewhere. And I came home and I just told him everything that they said.
No!
I totally, because I was too panicked about it. I was like, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. Have you done this? And because ultimately, I will say, like, I was like, if he doesn't do all this and know all this, he'll never leave my house. He'll never go to college.
You know, that fear is very real. That is a very real fear, visceral fear.
How about you?
Well, first, can I just tell you, you are forgiven, 100%
Thank
forgiven.
you.
The way you have to make yourself essentially suffer in order to be, stick to your guns. And you end up being hurt more than they are by being stuck to your guns. I mean, I've done that so many times.
Yeah.
Just to have the illusion of sticking to my guns.
Yeah.
And it all like backfires on me. So you're forgiven. I know your pain. Mine is that I almost murdered my son.
Oh.
So the method of murder, here is the method of almost murder, of attempted murder. My son loves peppers, and he likes to eat these peppers like they're like bite-sized sweet peppers. You just
Oh, yeah,
pop
yeah.
them in
Those
your
little
mouth,
baby
and
ones.
He loves those. So I don't normally buy them. Those are ones that his mom actually picks out and purchases. So that's the thing that they have together. But I was at the store and I had to buy them. So I bought a thing of peppers and looked at it, and they were called Scotch peppers. And I couldn't think of anything blander than the word Scotch. I'm like, Scotch tape.
My.
Well, some of you that know peppers might already know where this is going. Those of you, but look at it from my point of view. The word Scotch, it's Scotland. blandest food on the planet. Scotch tape, transparent, like nothing about Scotch sounds hot or dangerous or anything. It sounds bland.
Have you ever watched the Hot Ones?
No. Sorry, I have not watched Hot Ones. I've missed out on one cultural phenomenon, and it almost killed my son. So I brought him home. He's like, can I have some peppers in my salad? I'm like, sure. So I cut them up. I have to like scrape out the seeds and everything, and I put them all in the salad, and they look a little weird, but I'm like, whatever. And I give him the salad, and I go downstairs, and then a few minutes later, I hear, ah! I just hear a blood-curdling scream, and I run upstairs, and he's like, hot, 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 hot. And I'm like, what happened? And he's like, well, these peppers looked weird, so I didn't want to just stick them in my mouth, so I just stuck them with the tip of my tongue, and now my tongue is on fire.
Thank God your kid is smart, dude.
Well, the reason why is because when he was little, I said, hey, do you want to eat this little pickle? And he said, sure. He was like maybe 2 years old, and he popped it in his mouth, but it was a jalapeno. And I didn't know. And he just went, hot, hot, spicy, hot, hot. And it was like, so this is not the first attempted pepper murder.
You've heard him before. Yeah.
He took his time this time. And so his tongue burned him for maybe 15 minutes. And, I gave him some milk and stuff, and he was okay. But what's funny is he was not the one that suffered. I was the one that suffered because, as you may have heard earlier in the story, I was scraping out pepper seeds. Yeah. I didn't realize that my fingers were now covered in like incredibly hot pepper juice.
And you wonder what's wrong with your eyeball right now?
And I scratched my eye. My eye was on fire. My nose was on fire. And it took 2 days for it to finally go away. 2 days. And I'm washing my hands with olive oil because, little tip, you need to use oil to get rid of pepper oil. It was agony for days.
Did you look up like where the Scotch bonnet pepper lies on the Scoville scale? Do you know?
Oh yeah, it's like right at habanero.
Habanero. Let's see where Scotch bonnet lies. Here's a whole. It's right at the top third, I'd say.
How is it responsible for the store to not put like fire flames coming on the? All it did, it just said Scotch pepper, like in a little tiny Scotch bonnet pepper. Bonnet. What's more innocuous than the word Scotch? The word bonnet. Like little girls wear bonnets. Those aren't death hats.
Let's say
this name makes no sense.
This is all on you because I don't know.
No, it's not.
That Scotch bonnet pepper is bad.
Why would I know that?
I am surprised that they're selling a whole bag full of Scotch bonnet peppers.
It was this big. It was like really big, and I'm holding my hands out far apart.
And
it was a lot.
know like the little snacking peppers that you're talking about, and they're not the same shape as a Scotch bonnet pepper, but I can see how in size and color you could get confused if you didn't read. But I'm just dumbfounded that you read the word Scotch bonnet and you just had no bell went off at all. You're like, wait.
I have never in my life heard of a Scotch bonnet pepper. And then I asked my mom, and she had never in her life heard of a Scotch bonnet pepper, and she didn't know what was going on. You
really are white, man. You're super
I know.
White. It's an innocent mistake, and you've hurt your son before, and he's learned his lesson already. But I will say, it's certainly, I'm sorry you tried to kill your son with your ignorance, but it's an innocent mistake, and you should absolutely forgive yourself for it.
I already got punished, man. I got punished way worse than he did. That was something, man. When I just scratched my nose. Well, you know what? I've learned something.
Is it to read?
I did read. It said Scotch bonnet pepper. It didn't say Scotch bonnet pepper, caution, this will murder you and your family. Like, it didn't say anything but Scotch bonnet peppers in like little tiny print. There was nothing on this label that said you're about to enter into a world of intense pain. Like,
I feel like this is a great lesson in like the hubris of man. And in this case, I specifically mean men. If you don't know, you'll ask.
I have to tell you, I'm sorry, but I am not feeling forgiven right now. I really feel
forgiven. I just want you
that you are not forgiving me. And you are like, and it's not that my mistake isn't forgiven, it's that my sense that I'm a man has not been forgiven still.
Well, it's just
the idea that I'm male has not been forgiven.
I don't think I've ever picked something up at the grocery store not known what it is, and then not been like, oh shoot, what is that? And Googled it really quickly enough.
This is about me trusting in institutions that I guess I should not trust in.
This was, you thought you knew. This is not just.
No, this was, I thought that supermarkets would put warnings on things that were dangerous. And there was no warning on this. So I assumed, I'm like, I trust Super Stop and Shop to not want to kill me. So I trust that if it doesn't say warning, if you touch it incorrectly, your hand could burn off. It didn't say anything. It was literally just little type white thing, Scotch bonnet pepper. That's it. As if I know all the pepper lore.
They don't put it on the bag of onions, like might make you cry either, but most people know that. Listen, I'm impressed with your grocery store that has Scotch bonnet peppers because I live in the city and like, no, I would have to hunt. So like nicely done, your grocery store, having a wide variety of pepper.
I think we're going to move on. I feel that I was forgiven for one thing and then just attacked for something completely different.
Your bad parenting, you're absolutely forgiven because it was an innocent mistake. Your male brain, you're not forgiven for. But go on.
All right. Well, talking about crazy male brains, you are the proud mom of two teenagers, but a boy and a girl with, I'm sure, very different styles. But I have a about to turn 11-year-old, but he's also hitting puberty right now. His voice cracked in class the other day. He's like, which he wouldn't tell me about. Like I had to hear about it like secondhand from one of his friends. Like he wouldn't tell me that he did.
I would never have told something about either if my voice cracked, I think.
I was so proud. I'm like,
oh, really? What about when it happened to yourself?
You think I remember that? Plus I was such an awkward kid. He's not
you were
awkward.
18.
Like actually, I'm hoping it happens next week. I'm still waiting for it. But when it happens, I'm going to be very excited. But and I'm dating someone who has a 13-year-old daughter. And so I'm starting to hit these teen, personalities and traits and things like that. And it is really interesting to me how different it was than, raising an up until 10-year-old boy, which is a very different thing. And then it did strike me that it's even more different and more probably difficult in some ways as a single parent. I mean, it feels like everything is, but it also feels that the dynamics are different because, at least with me, there's a little undercurrent of anger at me that he has because we went through a divorce, and that's totally normal and he should have that. But when teenagers are already angry at their parents and then they have a little bit more anger that they feel is completely justified and probably, from their point of view is to feed that, I can just see that even spiraling out of control. So I would just love to know how you navigated all of that and are still navigating all of that.
Well, I will say that I probably have a radical parenting point of view in that I love teenagers. I find it so interesting and vulnerable and raw, like as a human beings, like this point in their lives, actually starting from like that middle school age, that preteen tween age, because everything, like it's literally like their skin has been ripped off and they're like emerging from the cocoon of their childhood. It's just like everything is hard and vulnerable and they're developing like thought processes and interesting ideas and like their own identity. And I find that kind of great. So this is a thing that I often tell parents who don't have teenagers yet, because the way that, what somebody will tell a baby, like somebody with a newborn, like, oh, enjoy those cuddles. It gets hard when they're 2, or like whatever platitude bullshit that people say to parents to make them feel bad for some reason. I try to do the opposite for teenagers. And like, I think just kind of getting into that mindset of this is a cool time in their lives changes how you see everything about like, oh, this is going to be hard. Oh, I'm bracing for it. Or, I already see the anger. Like if you just set your mind to like, this is so much easier than toddler. This is so much easier than an irrational 3-year-old. I think that might help just like from the outset.
When you have a younger kid, the way that you get a young kid to do something is you do it with a lot less justification than you do as you get older. And now suddenly when the kids are older, it's kind of like you're a lawyer and you have to justify every point that you make. And like, you have to actually back your crap up
Yeah.
And how do you do that without going insane?
Okay. This is an interesting, so fascinating that you're bringing this up, because I just recounted to my stepmother, who has no biological children of her own. And she like loves to hear like parenting stuff like this, because she's just kind of like intrigued by it from a anthropological point of view. So I was recounting this like bad fight that I had with my son and how I was worried, and like the subsequent, like we had a screaming match on the phone, and then when he came back from his dad, we had the like sit down long talk that his sister was involved in too, and it was like there was tears, and we were going through, and like she's like, it's really kind of amazing that you just don't tell him this is how it is, and you explain it to him. And I was like, well, yeah, but that's how we've always done it. And she's like, I know, I saw you do it with them when they were little, and I think that that's part of the advantage that I have right now with them as teenagers. It's just my default positioning is I've never enjoyed authoritarianism, luckily for me. But I also remember really vividly what it felt like being a kid. Like I have an emotional connection to people being condescending and people not assuming that I could understand or was aware even of like the subtext that was going on. And I was an incredibly perceptive kid. So the way that I've parented throughout their whole lives leading up to now has been with a boatload of explanation, with reasoning, and like ultimately, I think this is the big difference. And this is what I hear back from my kids too. It's like, I've treated them like full, complete human beings their whole lives, and like that are equal to the respect that they deserve is equal to the respect that I deserve. And I think that makes it easier now. Like, it makes it harder because like we have to sit there and have like conversations about like, even though that I have this rule that you're not going to sleep over at your girlfriend's house. And he's like, well, I hate when anybody has any pedagogy that they just believe in. And like, we're having this back and forth that's like emotional and tough, but like we came to a conclusion at the end of it, which was basically, I will never change my point of view on this. It's just one of my beliefs. Just like I believe that we sit down to dinner every night together, and like, it's not normal that everybody does that, but like, that is one thing that I really value. And this is another thing that I believe in. And he's like, well, I won't ever agree with it. I'll do what you say. And like, we got to the way we resolved it was like, okay, well, we're not going to come to the same, we're not going to compromise. We're not going to come to a position, but we can agree that we're just going to move on. And it was like a complicated, long, drawn-out situation. But it really is like, it's the investment that you made all along is paying off in this. And it turned out way better than fights that I had with my mom, for example, like when I was a teenager, and I would just like storm off, slam the door, and maybe 2 weeks from that door slam would talk to her again.
I'm actually fairly similar to you in that I've been trying to at least, I think of it as including him in his own upbringing.
Yeah.
A lot of times I think we almost, we treat them like a pet and not a child. It's like, we're doing this for you, and you may not understand now, but you'll understand later. And, you don't see the world the way I see it. And my thought has always been, well, if you don't see it the way I see it, I should explain the way I see it. Like they should have some sense of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Otherwise the world, I'm a representation of the world. The world seems capricious, right? The world will seem like it doesn't make any sense. And a lot of the world doesn't make sense. Yeah. But at least I can make sense, and like, this is why I'm doing this. This is where I'm coming from. And I think the word that it does build up in is it builds up trust in your kids that you're doing things for a reason. Yeah. And it is the most valuable thing. And we like to talk about as parents, don't break my trust. This is like the trust is a two-way street. Yeah. And, sometimes we forget that. And teenagers especially, that word gets thrown around a lot, it seems, the word trust.
Totally. Well, I mean, it's not something that if you didn't do it all along, it's not something you can start now. At 10, 11, maybe you can do better. Like if you feel like you haven't given them that trust. I know, maybe I got lucky and I got really good teenagers and like that, and what they've gone through despite like having, we separated at 13, which is like, it was the thing I was most upset about when my ex and I separated. It's like, this is exactly the wrong age. Like, this is what we're going to ruin them. Like 13 is the wrong age. Everything's going to be terrible. They're going to hate us. Like, I just like imagine this like cataclysm of teenagedom that we're about to unleash on ourselves. It didn't happen, and that was because, and I think this is like ultimately the advice here is like, you have to change who you are as a person rather than expecting like to mold them and have them change. And what we did like through the separation was like, you know, my ex and I suppressed our egos and our anger so that we could have dinner together every night for that first year, except for the weekends.
Wow.
You know, he came over and had dinner every night together. And like, we were still a family. And like, we were really committed to being like, we are still a family. And I was fucking pissed at him. And we had our own, like it wasn't about like, you know, everything is perfect. It was, we are still in this together. And we are going to do what we told you we were going to do, which is like be your family and both be here and both be involved all the time. So we did that.
Yeah. I mean,
and we kept like, you know, we let them have their feelings about stuff. Like my daughter, when we first told her, like ran into the bathroom and locked. It was the only room in the house that she could lock both of the doors and know that we probably wouldn't try to get into her. Like when we told her we were getting separated, she locked herself in the bathroom and cried for hours. And it was a long time till we could get her out. And like, you know, normal teenage stuff. But the only thing that we could do is make ourselves better instead of trying to make them better. And I think that's important.
It's funny. There's like a litany of stories, and it's almost like you need to share them because I think it's good to hear, but it's just so hard to share. It's that moment when you tell your kids and how did it go? Like when we told our son and same way, you know, did it together in a very, you know, unified way. Yeah. It's funny. He didn't really react at all.
Would you like to know what my son did when my daughter was doing that?
What did your son do?
We were all sitting in our room, like on the bed, kind of talking about it. And she like zoomed into the bathroom and slammed the door. And we're like, "Are you okay, buddy? Like, is there anything that you want to ask or say?" And he's like, "What are we having for dinner?" And we're like, "No, it's okay. Like, if you're upset about this, like, it's a big deal. Like, we get it. Like, is there nothing that you want to ask or talk about?" And he's like, "You both still gonna be my parents?" "Yeah." "Am I gonna see you both still?" "Yeah." "Okay, then I'm fine." And it's true. Like, I think that at that age, like 12, 13, like, and I do think my kids had it relatively easy because like at that age, there were definitely like mood swings. Like my son was like a live grenade when it was time to get up and go to school. And he didn't eat. Like we were just truly would just like back away from him because we didn't want to set him off. And I understand that because I am that way. Like there's nothing that you could ever do. And I hated when people tried to like make me happier. So I would just like, we would just not talk to him. We'd just make sure he was doing the thing that he needs to be doing. We'd get him to the bus. And then luckily the pandemic happened in the middle of middle school. So he didn't have to wake up quite so early and didn't have to get into the bus to get to school because we did school from home for a couple of years. But that there's like big, like that hormonal swing. It's true. Like it happens and it affects different brains differently, obviously, because there's a boy and a girl in my house at the same age going through the same thing. It's been kind of fascinating.
It's like an experiment. You have a control here. Like
truly, I've called it my in-home biology experiment since they were born. Because like all of the gendered stuff or like, you know, the preconceived gendered stuff, like you see play out and how it happens or I mean, maybe we're not supposed to call that gender anymore, but that's sex-based stuff.
I don't know what to do about that. And I know this is every time I wade into this, I get into trouble. And it's just funny how I think we've just made it so complicated that it's even hard to talk about. You know what I mean? Like,
yes. And I think that part of getting old, like we are, is like just accepting that we're wrong probably about most things. So we apologize.
I would say it's not even wrong per se. It's just we're trying to be part of a conversation that we don't have the language for anymore.
Yeah, that was a fun thing. That there was a lot of conversation about that, like around 12, 13 too, because like that's the age at which kids starting to like recognize things like, you know, homosexuality and transgender and like all of the things that start coming up at puberty. Like, and I remember like, my kids have an uncle who's, you know, fairly young and gay and has like this great kind of like flamboyant group of New York City LGBTQ friends and artists and like, you know, so it was something in their world and they were aware of. And like, I remember talking about it with my ex and like some friends of ours and like getting called out immediately about like, oh my God, you can't say that. Like, that's not how this is. I was like, when we grew up, we didn't have, it's like this, I mean, not to say that we didn't have gender people, like, but like the language around it, the ideology, like the way to talk about things appropriately without hurting people, like we're learning too.
Yeah. And well, and I also say that like this shifts, and it doesn't shift because it has to shift. It shifts because we decide it shifts. And the same way with race, the same way with anything where we're like, well, what are the appropriate words? For me, the people who are appropriate to make those decisions are the people who we're talking about. You know, a Black person gets to decide what I call them. An LGBTQ person gets to decide what I call them. And that will change. And you can't get mad at the fact that it changes. It can be arbitrary to a certain sense that it changes. Yeah. Like the difference between, I mean, God, this is where I get into a ton of trouble, but I think like the difference between saying the word colored and saying the word Black is a difference in how a Black person feels about being called that. And we, as white people, have no sense of what that feels like. And we just have to be like, we understand why you no longer like being called colored, that makes you feel bad, and that Black doesn't make you feel bad. And we are on board with what that should be. Our parents don't understand why that changed. And they don't understand why they can't use the word they used to be able to use the word before. But you just have to accept the fact that it's not your decision to make.
And it's an interesting point for you specifically. I feel like we've talked about this before, but like your son is adopted and he's Black. Yes. And so it must be like an interesting, you know, the puberty with a young Black boy.
There was this one article that I read that devastated me for years. I was in the New York Times. It was about this white woman who had adopted 2 Black sons. And it was called When Black Boys Become Black Men. Mm-hmm. And it was their kids, her sons turned 12, and suddenly they went from being the cute Black boy to being the Black man. Yeah. And what a hard time she had with it. And what a hard time she had, like her instinct was to cut their hair a certain way so that they seem younger or less threatening, and like all the things that you want to do to protect, but then having to realize that part of this is you, like you are looking at them and what are you being triggered by? And you're like wanting to make them look like something that doesn't trigger you. And you have to be able to look at yourself and say, my own prejudice, I don't care if you've adopted a Black child or not, you're still prejudiced. Like everyone is. Everyone has a prejudice. And so you have to look at yourself and be like, what about how I'm trying to shape him is good for him? And what about how I'm trying to shape him is just good for you?
My kids are mixed, and like I am, and like their dad is, but they don't look at, I mean, and they're not Black mixed, like we're mixed with Asian. So like, it's a totally different perception, you know, like we look white, I look white, their dad, like you look at him, you're like, there's something in there, but I'm not sure. But like, he's perceived as white, and my kids look white as shit. So there's nothing that we like, that they have all the benefits of every kind of white privilege that you could possibly, like just walking about on the street. Of course, I'm irrational, and when I get in fights with my kids too, but I try really hard to be rational, and it really annoyed them recently, each one of them separately, like when we were having like disagreements, when I'm forgiving them in the moment by citing science about it. I'm like, listen, this is the age, like as a teenager, you're supposed to be mad at me, you're supposed to be pushing away, you're supposed to be identifying something in me that you're not, and like that is a biological imperative, and like I get it. And then I'll give the butt, and they'll be like, oh, come on. It's not just because we're teenagers that we feel this way. And I shouldn't mock their voice like that. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Do not tell them this podcast exists. It will just make your life harder.
I know. No, well, they don't care about the other business that I launched. So hopefully.
That's true. Their total lack in indifference in anything that you do is definitely profound. A boon here.
It's totally fine. They're vaguely proud of me, but that's about it.
That's nice.
But it's fine. One time I got a nice card and I put it up on my wall, with my son telling me that he was proud of me, that most people who got laid off would just wait for a job, and I made things happen. I was very cute of it. But the point is, like, they don't think that all these things that are happening to them are the result of chemicals in their brain changing. Like, this is just who they are. And like, that's the hardest part for me, is like to find, like,
So
I
interesting.
know why this is happening to you. I understand from a rational point of view why you're doing this and why you feel this way, even though it's upsetting to me or whatever. And they're like, no, it's not just that. This is who we are, or this is what we believe in, or this is why we're, like, whatever the thing is. Like, they know that science too, because I've talked about it with them, and they've read about stuff their own or watched YouTube videos about stuff on their own.
Yeah,
But, like,
by God knows who. I'm sure a very vetted expert.
well, my son does watch a lot of history and science by people who seem like they know what they're talking about, but I don't know.
They seem like they know what they're talking about. Sure. Mr.
that's-
Beast seems like he knows what he's talking about.
I know. My, as I was saying, I was recounting this argument to my stepmom, and, she had said, like, oh, it's kind of fascinating that, they're listening to you, even in that fight, like when they're saying things back to you, like what you're recalling to me here is like, tells me that they're listening to you, even in their anger. My son said, like, you're the best mom of any of the moms that I know, and blah, blah, blah. And like, he said that in the middle of a fight. And like, I would never have said anything that kind to my mom in a fight with her. It was hearing my stepmom tell me that I had done a good job, because she could hear the positive in my story that I wasn't even aware of. I was just recounting, like, oh, at the end of it, like, we made up and we hugged and we moved on. Like, that was the positive for me. She's like, that's not the positive here. It's like, it's A, you're listening to them, B, they're involved in this discussion and you care what they have to say, and they know that. So they're sitting there with you having it. And like, C, like, they're repeating back to you the values that you're hoping to instill in them.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So it's not like, there's not like one answer, right? Like, it's just an entire human, like, all of the time.
Well, I mean, it's a foundation. Like, you built a foundation there. And I think, I disagree a little bit when you say that, you have to do it from when you're young. Otherwise, you're kind of shit out of, I'm paraphrasing, but I don't think it's ever too late to start to build trust with your children. If you're going to change and try to do that, and let's say that you had a parenting style, or your co-parent, your former spouse, whoever, had a parenting style, and you let it happen, because that happens a lot too.
Totally.
I don't think it's ever too late. It's just that if you're going to change, I think you just need to be consistent, and you need to commit to that change. Like, because you have a long road ahead of you. Building trust is time, and you need probably a couple of years of sticking to it, and it's not going to play the way you want it to, and it's going to feel hard. And my dad was somebody who, we hear a lot over this podcast about me and my dad, but my dad was very much somebody who told me how things should be. Yeah. He was an old school thing. But when I hit my teenage years, I started pushing back, and he started to show me that respect and trust. And it took me a long time to trust that trust. And it took years for me to trust that trust. But eventually, we got to the point where he just would put his money where his mouth is. And he'd be like, you know what? I say I trust you. I do. I'm going to let you stay by yourself for 2 weeks. And I'm just going to call to check in, but I'm going to trust that you're going to make good decisions. He would be consistent in that this was really something he believed and was doing, and wasn't just something that he was doing to try to, like, shut me up or get me to do things in another way.
And for teens now, like, I busted my son because I saw him on the Find My Phone app, and I was talking to my best friend about this, and my parents about this, my stepmom and my dad too, and they're like, God, it sucks that teenagers can't even lie to their parents anymore. And like, it's like kind of a funny thing to say, but like, when I put myself in my teenager shoes myself, like, there are plenty of things that I lied about and nobody found out.
Oh yeah.
Any wiser. And it's probably for the best for both sides. But now my kids don't have the ability, the autonomy, just because of like how, I could take them off of Find My Phone so that they're not in the family anymore. But I don't want
you really?
I don't want
Emotionally, could you? Yeah. Well,
it's like, it just sucks for them. Like, that is an interesting, I think that as parents generationally, like we have a lot more communication and trust with our kids, and like the relationships in a lot of cases are better than they used to be with the the kind of parents that raised us, or what our relationship was like. And it's not, it's not black and white, obviously, but like I think the majority of us, we did not communicate truthfully with our parents most of the time.
But are they owed that? And then this is a good argument. And we're going to have this conversation because we're going to have a guest on who specializes in helping people make their kids more independent. And I think there are ways in which our kids are more dependent than ever. I think yours is a little different because you're in the middle of the city and it's a little different vibe. But, for across the country, you have, because of technology, because we're able to salve our worries through things like Find My Phone, it does stunt your kids because your kids know that they are never truly alone, and they know that they always have an out on things. They know that there's somebody can swoop in and help them. And when I was by myself during the summer, it was, this was a long time ago, a hurricane hit. So I was by myself as a hurricane hit, and I was just in the house by myself with my dog as a hurricane's coming. My parents had no way to get to me. I'm 16 years old. It's barreling down. And I had to somehow weather it for a week after. No power, no anything. I had to figure out how to feed myself. I had to figure out how to light the damn house with candles. Like, I had to do all that myself. And they never drove up. They waited a week, and they came up when they normally come up. And they're like, listen, once they knew I was fine, they were like, you can figure out how to handle this. Go ahead. And that's because they didn't have the tools to, they didn't have constant communication. And I do think that that's something that we have a hard time doing now.
It just gave me, for those who aren't watching this, but just listening, the amount of shock and head shaking that I just did as Scott was
It was amazing. Watching Lily go through all stages of just astonishment was amazing. She could not imagine
that it just inherited.
I know. And yet, it's all fine but I would bring it back though to the same thing you were talking about, which is that trust in your kids is not just about, trusting that they will make a good decision. It's also about trusting that they know how to take care of themselves as they get older. It's trusting that they can navigate stuff without you. And that, I think, is the hardest thing for parents, single or otherwise, to do, especially nowadays.
I will say, I trust most of these teenage girls to take care of themselves, to eventually clean the house if it gets too dirty. Those I trust. What is amazing, and it's not just my son, it's across the board sons who the moms I talk to, and they're like, I don't know how they're going to survive in this world. And my daughter has this question about her own brother, how is he going to be okay on his own? I was like, baby, we just got to let him do it. He'll figure it out.
Look, if you let us do it, we do it.
And the difference is, you wait until you have to do it on your own. And I think that's maybe one of the differences. Girls will take initiative to want to do something or have something of their own, or make a play, in many cases, or be responsible for themselves. They will take an initiative to do that before it's given to them. In my experience, I found that a lot of boys wait until they have to take responsibility for them. And that's part of the problem.
I am going to so strongly disagree with you that it might shut down our internet connection. That's how strongly I disagree with that. because my son has learned to take so much initiative, and he makes his own breakfast when he gets up in the morning. Sometimes he wakes up an hour before I do.
I want to adopt him.
Will. I know. Well, trust, he's not. No, stay away. No. Bad Lily. He is just so self-sufficient in a lot of those ways, and it's because he's had to be. And I chalk that up, honestly, to the fact that it's a single dad, single son relationship, because I don't parent the way a single mom would parent in a lot of ways.
You mean you don't overcompensate for the lack of a two-parent household by trying to do absolutely everything?
I do. But I do it in the other way. I overcompensate for the lack of hugs he might be getting. I overcompensate for the sort of emotional support, and to the point where he tells me to stop. Like, he's like,
Yeah.
you got to stop. Like,
Get out of here.
and, but maybe because I'm a guy, and so I don't have as low an opinion of myself as women seem to have. I don't doubt that he can take care of himself.
Yeah.
That when he wake up and I say, hey, take your shower, and before I wake up, I want you to be showered and ready to go to school. And he does it. I wake up, he's dressed, showered, ready to go to school. And it's because I've never doubted for a second he can do it.
Just like everything that you've just said right now, like, you know, you're absolutely correct. And what we've done here throughout is like make these sweeping generalizations about teenagers or girls or boys. And what it ultimately comes down to is like the individual, you know, you got to
and the relationship.
Yeah.
It's the, you know, to know that, like, and I think that's the biggest hope that hopefully we can put out there, is that all these things that seem insurmountable, they're surmountable by the relationship that you're able to build with your kids.
Yeah.
And that's what matters. Like, I built a relationship with my son where he does that stuff.
Yeah.
And you built a relationship with your kids where they send you notes about how proud they are of you. And sure, it's once and not like regularly the way you deserve.
Get out of control here. It was once. It's a good point you're making.
I make them occasionally. This is my one good point.
I feel like this is the first. Is it? No, I'm just messing with you.
To the quick.
No,
to the
it's
quick.
true. You often make me feel much better about lots of things. I'm very sorry.
About guys. Can I make, there's one point I wanted to make, and then I think we can, you know, but I meant to make it earlier. When you were talking about how you like were talking to your kids about, well, I know that it's biologically is why you're thinking this, and that this is a hormonal thing. And it just made me think of when I tell women that they're acting the way they're acting because they're on their period.
Oh, totally.
And the last thing any woman ever wants to be told is that their emotions are invalidated because of their hormones.
Yep.
And it may be heightened, and it may be your reaction is a little bigger because of it.
I'm literally biting my tongue right now, but go on.
It is funny because it's the analogy between that and trying to tell a teenager that the reason they're feeling that is because of their hormones. They're probably going to take it the same way.
I've never said it's hormones. I will clarify that. I've never said it's
look, I'm not,
because I just got so mad.
I know. And look, I'm not saying that. That's what popped into my head because people do say that.
It's an apt analogy. I've said I will say brain development is what I've used. And not
Lili feels attacked right now. Lili feels this is twice now she's been attacked.
But you're right. Like that's I will say, like, that is exactly when you brought that up. I was like, oh shit, that must have felt bad. You're right. Like, so yes. So you're right about that. You're wrong to ever have said anybody's big things were about PMS. And I want to slap you through the computer.
I am sorry, but there's nothing more male in the world than trying to invalidate a woman's opinion because of the point, where they are in their cycle. Because
that comes up at times when it's like, well, I'm week 1, so it has nothing to do with it. And these, like, you get to say that, oh, are you PMSing? Because you don't know shit, you stupid penis haver. Like, I'm sorry, I just had a really strong reaction. The problem is that it's like a blanket statement. And my hope would be that I'm not going to say it to my kids anymore because, like, that was just so effective. What you just said, I'm just not going to say it anymore. I thought it was being rational.
I've made change.
You made change.
Well, I've learned over a long time. And here I will say, here's a dirty secret. A secret you already know the answer to.
Yeah.
Most guys know that's true. I think most guys know that you don't turn into an entirely different person when your hormonal cycle is different, but it is a easy way to score a point. And it is an out. And I think, when you are arguing with someone who oftentimes you lose, you're losing an argument, going into the emotional argument, whether it's because of your gender entirely, or whether it's because of where you are in the cycle, whatever, saying, well, you're making an emotional argument and I'm making a logical argument. It's just the way that guys try to win arguments. and it is horrendously shitty. And it is something that's probably one of the hardest crutches, I think, for guys to let go of because it's just so effective.
Oh my God.
And But I think that most guys are aware that it's a crutch and they are using it the same way. Honestly, I think, we all as in relationships, we have our crutches to win arguments, things that we always go to because logic isn't working, because you're in the wrong or whatever reason. That is one of those that guys go to. And I think letting go of that was such a game changer for me in how I dealt with women in general. And it came from just having mostly female friends and seeing having real conversations about it.
I want to apologize on Scott's behalf to every girlfriend or spouse he's ever had. He didn't mean it.
I didn't. I did it I let go of it in my 20s. I'm not saying it was up till like last year, but no. I think I'm going to be honest about it.
I just where did you learn to do that? Oh my God. What a terrible thing to learn.
It's handed to guys. It's handed to us. It is a bullet put in our gun. We didn't even put it in ourselves. It's this sense of we're told that women go through this emotional period during their period, and we don't understand what periods are and, at the time or anything. Nobody explains what a hormonal shift is. Mm-hmm. Nobody equates it to, do you remember when you couldn't keep your hand out of your pants when you were 13 and you're like, you couldn't stand up in school because your damn penis was hard because you were in anatomy and you're talking about something that isn't
Boobs.
Even sexy.
Yeah. You saw an outline of boob.
Yeah. Were you a different person then? Were you a less valid person then? Were your opinions less valid? Yeah. See, now you're undermining.
It was just I'm sorry.
I know, but no, you weren't. You don't feel like you weren't. You were. Like, that is what guys go through when they're going from like 12 to 14.
Yeah.
The way it changes the way you interact with your world is, I think, worse because you act worse.
Okay.
Like women are not walking around with their hands down their pants as they walk down the street every month. Guys can't keep 12-year-olds can't keep their hands out of their pants. Because of their hormones are telling them that they need to touch themselves.
There's that apple pie scene in
American Pie.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that is something that you don't even think of as weird. It's a compulsion. No, guys don't think of it at the time as weird. It's just a compulsion and you're answering the compulsion, but women don't feel that compulsion.
Oh,
I don't think.
My God, I'm going to leave the podcast. Oh my God. I'm going to take a deep breath and say...
Take a deep breath. Just remember, you were just complimenting me 5 minutes ago.
That's a different me. Right? I agree.
Are you telling me that a woman would fuck a pie?
I am telling you that you would never have any idea because girls are so much smarter about what is appropriate in given situations than boys ever are, that you have no idea what we're using as vibrators.
Do you think it's that? But do you think it's that? Or do you think it's that? Well, I know what you think, but could it be that it's that the compulsion in a boy is just so great that even though they know the decorum, they can't help themselves?
I do think that it is a very strong drive when your brain becomes flooded with testosterone. My own, he's going to be so mad if he ever listens to this podcast. My own son never went through all of this disgusting, fucking his sock shit that I hear so many teenage moms describing the sticky socks and all of
Lili.
Locking the door.
Lili.
But listen. So I think that
Sorry, did you just say there are no secrets anymore? Because I'm sensing that there are indeed secrets between your children and you.
No, I don't think that my kid doesn't masturbate. That's not what I think. I'm just thinking that there are certain personal differences between what how you handle your behavior. I mean, I know plenty of men who are we're not the I can't keep my hand out. Felt the compulsion strongly, but we're able to control the behavior in public.
Can I say what my point was though?
No.
Well, finish your point, and then I'll say what my point was.
No, go ahead.
There was a point here, but you finish your point.
Even if you went through something very strong for a very short amount of time in your life, even trying to compare that to like the what women go through on a monthly basis for the next 30 or 40 years, and saying that there's any kind of comparison between that brief period of like strong sexual desire as a teenager and like the tumult that we all go through between, even if you don't have kids, never are pregnant, like, and leaving that aside, it's just like phenomenal to me that you can possibly think that this discrete period of time is worse than or more severe.
So that was not my point at all.
Okay.
That was not my point at all. My point, before you take that little voodoo doll you have of me and start putting the pins in it.
I literally
my point. I know you do. I know you do. You made it initially. You're like, this may come in handy. If we ever start talking about hormones, this is going to happen. My point was, this comparison was a way to get guys to understand that a hormonal shift doesn't change who you are as a person and doesn't invalidate your decisions and your thoughts.
Like, I have heard some people say, like, you know, and this didn't happen for me, unfortunately, but like, you know, how terrible their relationship was with their parents between ages 13 and like when they went to college. Yeah. And then after college, they were like, oh God, I was such an asshole. I'm sorry. I'm here. I'm back again. And I've heard parents say that about their kids. Like, it's so nice to be able to have a relationship with my kid again because they're a human being again. So I think that, and to some extent, that may happen.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe, and this is very possible, it could be that I made a bad point. This is possible. It happens every once in a while.
There's so much growth in this podcast.
You know, well, it's funny. Sometimes you go down, because I've never thought about this before. And as we're talking, I'm like trying to think about it and think it through. And I'm like, you know what? Is there a connection here? And I start trying to defend that connection. And then I watch you as you respond to it and realize that it's very hard for me to then explain it, what makes sense in my head. And then as I try to explain it more, I'm like,
you dig in deeper.
Wow, this might not actually be a good analogy. And all I can do at that point is say, you know what? This might not have been the best analogy. I apologize for taking us down this weird and analogy rabbit hole that didn't go anywhere.
I thought about this the other day too, when I was, thinking, I think way too fucking much about parenting right now, but I was thinking about it and I was like, shit, this is the first time I'm ever doing this. This is the first time I've had two 17-year-olds. It's the first time you've ever had an 11-year-old. Like, we're first-time parents, and like, we're fucking up so much, and like trying to do our best and learning and like hearing ourselves have a thought and then being like, well, actually, I guess I don't believe that, or maybe I shouldn't think that way. It's so like, whatever. It's fine. I don't mind.
What it's funny. We started with the parenting fail forgiveness thing. This is the real parenting fail forgiveness point, where we talked about it.
Yeah.
And I thought this is really interesting, because this kind of conversation often happens in which you don't end in this place, where everyone gets offended. We both get offended for different reasons, walk away mad. And look what happens when you can take 2 extra seconds and maybe come to a point where you're like, well, you know what? Maybe we can learn from this, and I can learn not to make an analogy without going to the end of the analogy.
Well, I think it's an interesting point. Like, that is a lovely thing that you said. And I think one of the reasons that we can do that, you and I can do that, is because there's no stakes, right? And so what it's hard to do, and it's what I'm trying to learn to do with my own kids and like other relationships too, is like take this kind of like, and it's going to sound kind of crazy and cold, but like emotional remove, rather than being involved super emotionally. Like, you and I can talk about this stuff all day long. Like, and there's no stakes here. Like, you're going to go do what you do. I'm going to go do what I do. We both learn
stakes.
There's some stakes. We learn
your opinion of me. Your opinion of me is a stake. It is a stake, and it's a meaningful stake. I care about your opinion of me. That is a stake that that matters.
I appreciate that. That's very sweet of you to say. But what I'm saying is, like, we're not in a relationship. We're
completely.
We're not parent and child. Like, it's so easy to be like philosophical and thoughtful and like unemotional and have these kind of disagreements and come to this like nice conclusion where you can say I'm wrong, or I can say like, oh, you're right. Like, I should never do that again. Like, I'd never thought about that. Like, it's so lovely to have a conversation like this and genuinely change how you think about things. And that's I think the thing that I am aspiring to as a parent and like with my kids or like with my ex, because it's lovely and fulfilling and like calm when you and I can like disagree while to, a nice conclusion.
But I mean, the bit that I do find most helpful here is that, like, especially as your kids, I mean, any age, but like, I do think that having teenagers is just a lot. You're dealing just with a lot more of this uncertainty and a lot more of this doubting yourself, because the arguments they make are a lot smarter.
Yeah.
And they're a lot smarter about how they talk
different.
to you. And so having these kinds of conversations, low stakes and yet high stakes, maybe for your own worldview, but low stakes for, the actual conversation.
Yeah. And
that's helpful. It's helpful.
It's super helpful. And I think there's so many things that we didn't touch on that are actually like practical problems of having teenagers that like maybe we'll do a part 2 and 3 and 4 and 5.
Part 2. We're doing part 2.
Yeah, because we didn't talk about like sex. We didn't talk about drugs. We didn't talk about driving. We didn't talk about like there's so many like practical problems or like difficulties that you run into with teenagers. Like we talked about like our emotional relationships with them, which is just like scratching the tip of the
just scratching the surface. Well, we will end it here. Know that there is a part 2, probably a part 3, 4, 5, and 6. I thought this was fascinating. And I am both excited and terrified as my son gets older. But I will say more than anything, I want to go on the record with just saying how impressed I am with how you've raised these 2 kids to at least have that trust in you to be able to, weather all of this and yet still have that underlying, civility, that underlying trust. That is just, it's a model I aspire to. So,
well, and even in the fight that we were having, I had the thought like, man, these people are better than I am. Like, thank God. Like, they're better people than I am.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Leave a like or a crazy comment. We'd love to hear from you, and see you again soon.